So StrateGene, as you all most likely know, is a genetic test. Now, it used to be just a report only where we use 23andMe and Ancestry, but we realized that we needed to do better because 23andMe and Ancestry were not reporting some really important genes that we felt and read from the research that should be included. So we needed to create our own genetic chip, and which is why we created the StrateGene genetic test. And the new StrateGene genetic test now offers a new updated report. And if you have a former StrateGene report, like the old school one where you ran your 23andMe or your Ancestry, and you want to upgrade to the new StrateGene genetic test and get the new report, you can do so. And our team will honor a discount for you. So just contact our support team at Seeking Health, and they will help you out. All right, so let's get right into it. And if you have a current StrateGene report, go ahead and comment in here, like you've got one, or you're on the fence, or you're not really sure if you should get it or not. But go ahead and comment in the Q&A box or the chat box, and just say that if you've ordered it, so I know how many of you actually have it, or if you're considering on getting it, and what's holding you back from getting it, so I know I can support you in making that leap of faith. Or on the other side, saying that you probably shouldn't get it. There's some people that should not get StrateGene for various reasons. Overwhelm is one, and lack of time or desire to learn is another. Yep, I understand it. It is an investment. Yep. It's typically about 4 to 6 weeks to get the results in when you get it back. All right, so quite a number of you already have it. So that's good. And some are brand new, and the original, considering to get the new one. Great. And the presentation that you're going to be learning, the things that you're going to be learning today are very valuable across the board, whether or not you have StrateGene. So this is not just for StrateGene users. For StrateGene users, it's going to make a lot more sense because you can just stare at your pathways and learn as we go. But even if you don't have StrateGene, you're going to be gleaning a lot of good information that's applicable for you. So let's dive in. But StrateGene on a whole there's a lot of detail. It's about 120 pages of information, but the reports, the pathways themselves prevent you from having to memorize. I mean, it's very freeing that you don't have to memorize all this information. So the overwhelm is, when you get it, is there, but our job here through these presentations is to reduce that sense of overwhelm. And very simply, StrateGene, the pathways, as you'll see in the upcoming slides, if you already have it, the pathways, if you break them down into various sections, it's a lot easier. So what you need to know about the pathways with StrateGene is there are things that are produced, then they are transported, and then they can be reabsorbed or metabolized, and they also have to be bound to receptors in order to function. So if you break your pathways down into these major categories, it's a lot easier. So let's show you what I mean by that. So looking at the histamine pathway here, you can see in blue, this is how histamine is produced. Histamine is produced from histidine going through this particular gene called HTC right here. Remember, these bubbles are genes, and the cofactor is the vitamin B6. So in order for histamine to be made, the blue has to happen. So histidine has to go through the HTC gene along with the cofactor of vitamin B6, and the gene has to be somewhat clean and functioning in order to be producing histamine, right? And then histamine is made, and then it can be transported, and we don't have the transporters here on this pathway for various reasons, but histamine is transported, and then it's bound to these receptors. So you can produce histamine all day long, all night long, but if you are not binding to the receptors, it's not going to do anything. And there's actually a lot of antihistamine medications out there that actually block histamine from binding to the receptors. So while you might get a benefit from taking an antihistamine medication, if you stop it, you're going to get histamine symptoms right away. Why? Because those medications block the histamine receptors. You stop taking the medication, that antihistamine drug comes off the receptor, but all the histamine is still in your blood. It's still available. You're producing huge amounts. Maybe you're stressed, maybe you have infections or so on. So that is a perfect example of how you could have all the histamine around and something can block the signal of the histamine. And medications of various sorts do this, not just with histamine, but neurological meds as well. So, and then the blue circles, this is how histamine is broken down in your body. So all these things, all the pink is how histamine is broken down. So if you break your pathways down from synthesis to transport and binding to receptors to breaking down, it makes StrateGene a lot more feasible. Now, if you look at a different pathway, this is the serotonin pathway. And the serotonin pathway here is showing you how tryptophan, which comes from your diet, is produced in the blue here to make 5-HTP, which is a supplement you can get over the counter. And then 5-HTP has to go through a gene called DDC along with a nutrient in order to make serotonin. So the blue makes things, and then you have to transport it, which is the gray, and then it binds to receptors, which is the green. So again, you can have all the serotonin you want, but if you're not transporting it very well, or you're not binding it to receptors very well, you're not going to get much action in your brain with serotonin. And then serotonin makes melatonin. So you can see how serotonin then helps synthesize melatonin, which is why there's blue circles here, because serotonin converts through this gene and this gene in order to make your melatonin. So if you have low serotonin, do you think you have sufficient melatonin? Probably not, right? But then the melatonin has to bind to receptors. And then after it's done binding to receptors, it gets metabolized and broken down, and you basically pee these things out. And that's why you can order lab tests from your doctor where you want to see how your cofactor levels are, or maybe your metabolites of your serotonin are, your melatonin metabolites, and you pee these out and the labs can pick them up. And when you think about this, and we're going to get more into detail here, so I'm just showing you some bigger pictures, but a lot of people think, and I as well in the beginning, that if you take a supplement like 5-HTP, which is here, that you should just make your serotonin. I used to prescribe 5-HTP to patients all the time, and some patients would get better and some patients wouldn't. And I couldn't figure it out. Some patients got irritable and migraines and insomnia and crazy, and other people just changed their life and they're all happy and things were awesome. So what is that difference? And that's what StrateGene does for you. It gives you an ability to deduce and figure out reasons why you are responding the way you are to various nutrients or the environment or medications or what have you. So, if you are taking sufficient 5-HTP, but you're not making enough serotonin, might be low in vitamin B6. Or let's say you have sufficient serotonin, but you're not transporting it very well. There's something going on with your serotonin transporter. If you have all that serotonin, but it's not transporting, it's not going to deliver that serotonin to your brain where it can then send signals and bind to the serotonin receptors. That's a big problem. Or let's say you're able to make the serotonin, the body can transport all that serotonin, but your receptors for your serotonin are not working well. They're blocked for various reasons. There's something blocking them. So that's a problem. So you need to unblock them in order for it to work. So look here, if you look here, pesticides slow the ability for serotonin to bind to your receptors. That's interesting, huh? Dopamine, blue is synthesis, gray is transport, and then you have receptors in green and reuptake. So, and then again, the pink or this reddish thing is how your dopamine is eliminated from your body, and then dopamine converts to norepi and epi as well, which you can see down here. So here's your epinephrine and your norepinephrine. So all these things, which bottom line is, if you look at your StrateGene, you produce it, you transport it, you bind it, And then when you're done with it, you can reabsorb it and then metabolize and get rid of it. And you have to look at all these steps. In the old StrateGene report, we merely focused on basically two genes in the neurotransmitter pathway, MAO-A and COMT. And those two genes focus primarily on the elimination of your dopamine and norepi and some epi as well. So that's all we showed you. And that's all we showed you because A, that's all the information we had at the time. B, it's because 23andMe didn't test for some of these other genes. And C, our understanding grew immensely. And so our understanding now is at a much more detailed level and a more thorough, comprehensive, holistic level than it was a number of years ago. So there are primarily pathways that are focused merely on production of things because and I'll show you here. So, and why is that? Your body needs to produce a lot of things for various pathways. And while we are showing you the histamine pathway and the dopamine pathway and the serotonin pathway separately, you will see as well that they all intertwine together. They are all overlapping to some degree. And it's very difficult to show how these pathways are communicating together. And when you look at your StrateGene report, a lot of you are just looking at what SNPs you have, particularly you want to look at MTGFR, you want to look at MAO-A. And if you're doing that, that's an okay step one, but you're not going to get the big picture and it's not going to give you the insight that you need. Where you need to go is first just understand the big picture of how everything is working together. And you can watch the previous webinars where we dive through this and the next ones, you're going to get better and better with this. But your body has to produce a lot of things so a lot of these pathways can function. So folate is one of these pathways. So your body burns through a lot of folate in order to make neurotransmitters, in order to make new skin. I just came back from vacation and I sunburnt myself pretty good because the UV index in Costa Rica was like 13 on some days. It was insane. You're out in the sun for literally 6 minutes and you're already fried to a crisp. So what happened? I burned through a lot of my folate in order to repair my skin because you don't have that huge amount of sun exposure. You don't need to burn through that much folate, but when you do get it, you better have some folate on board. And so I have a lot of folate issues in my pathway, so does my kids. So understanding that empowers me to understand if I get sunburnt, I better up my folate levels so I can repair that because my ability to produce folate in my body is very, very significantly hampered. And the gray here is the absorption of folate. So in my absorption and transport of folate is also reduced. And there's also folate receptors, which we don't have on here, but there's folate receptors 1, 2, and 3. And these are inhibited from antibodies is a big one and other things, folic acid. And so if your folate receptors aren't working very well, then that's also an issue. So again, you need to be able to eat the folate, you need to be able to absorb it, you need to transport it, it needs to be bound to the receptors. And then there's various different types of folate in your body. Folinic acid and methylfolate are the primary ones that are in higher concentration in your blood, which do most of the work. And if you're not able to produce those, then you better be getting them through supplements or food. So here is your folinic acid. And if you follow the arrows, so key thing with StrateGene is just follow arrows. Folinic acid is to make building blocks for your DNA up here, which is DNA damage, which you can get hurt from UV like I did. And then here's your methylfolate to support methylation. And then here's your methylation pathway. And methylation pathway, there's a lot of production here. So you have to produce a SAMe, which is the primary focus of the SAM cycle here. So in your new StrateGene report, you'll see a pathway called SAM, and that's acetylmethionine in your methylation pathway. And so the primary function of your SAM pathway is to make SAM. And so you can make it and you can recycle it. And that's the primary function here. And then you also need to get rid of it when it's in high amounts. And so we show you how that happens too. And then the TCN genes right here are how your vitamin B12 is carried. And so if you have issues in your transcobalamin 1 or 2 genes here, which we do test for, which you can get the results in your new StrateGene report, if you have a a variant in your TCN gene, then you may have a reduced ability to transport your vitamin B12. And if you are consuming folic acid, as you can see here, folic acid slows the ability for transcobalamin 1 or 2 to carry B12. Why? Because if you're carrying folic acid, so if I'm holding this water bottle right here and you throw me a football and I try to catch it, something's going to drop. Either I'm going to drop the football or I'm going to drop the water bottle. I can't do both, or maybe I can catch it one-handed by some awesome players out there, but probably not for me. So I'm going to botch it. So if your TCN genes are busy, hauling a bunch of folic acid around, B12 could be in your blood, and you could be supplementing with all the B12 or consuming liver or red meats, and you think you're doing a good job, and you get a lab back from your doctor, and you feel like you're B12 deficient. Your brain is foggy, your homocysteine is high, but your B12 levels are high. Your serum B12 levels are high. And I just saw someone here ask a question about that. So a high B12 level could be because you're not able to transport that B12 out of your blood and getting it into your cell. So sometimes you might see that you have a high amount of folate in your blood, serum folate, or you might see a high amount of B12, serum B12. And yes, you could be supplementing with those two nutrients where you could be consuming a lot of that, or you could have transport problems from not being able to transport it from your blood to get into your cell. It doesn't, it's good to have B12 and folate in your blood, but where it ultimately needs to go is where? Inside your cell. And so that's where you need these transport proteins to help with that, as in transcobalamin 1 and 2 here, and the SLC19A1 genes here. And in my family, we have a very slow folate transport, which reduces our capacity to transport folate by about 60%, if I'm not mistaken. And we spell that out in your StrateGene report. And it's good to know that. It's really good to know that. And transcobalamin 1 and 2, there's, I think, 1 or 2 family members of mine, I forget who have a slower ability to transport B12. And that's also good to know, because that's going to really, drive you to say, man, I better really avoid folic acid. So this is, again, also producing here and over here for producing SAM, but you need to be transporting your B12 in order for that to happen. Why? Because cobalamin is a primary nutrient needed for the MTR gene in order to convert your homocysteine into methionine, which then goes to your SAMe. And so many people are focusing on the SNP itself. They're focusing on the MTR. Oh, I have the MTR SNP, or I have the MTRR SNP, or I have the CBS SNP. But what you need to understand is all of it together. Well, I have a TCN 1 variant, which is slower, so I'm not able to carry my B12, and I'm also consuming folic acid, and that's probably I should be addressing that. So StrateGene gives you the whole picture. It's not just about SNPs, and you hear me say it all the time. And what's confusing is you're getting taught, or you're learning things from other Facebook groups or other doctors or health professionals, and they're just focusing on the SNPs. And so you're getting confused because you come here and I'm saying something completely different. And we all think we're right. And so you need to choose which type of information you believe is most comprehensive and useful for you. Of course, I think we're the most thorough and most holistic approach because we show you lifestyle, environment, nutrients, and how everything is working together as much as we can. Homocysteine is a building block for your glutathione. So here's your glutathione. There are transport proteins for glutathione, but the knowledge that we have about that is pretty low. So the research is still trying to figure that out. Glutathione is also, with concentration, it can push itself through into genes, I believe, into inside the cells, excuse me. But I can't really say much about the glutathione transport. In terms of glutathione receptors, you know, I don't know as well. So the glutathione pathway here is mainly about the production of glutathione and the recycling of glutathione. So, but the whole thing as a whole, as you can see here, is focusing on the production of glutathione. And a lot of health professionals, I want to warn you with this, a lot of health professionals will see that you might be low in glutathione. They might test you, or they might just assume that you're low in glutathione, and they'll load you up on glutathione, and you might do well for the first day or two, or the first week or two, maybe the first month. And then there might be a point where you start feeling really anxious or irritable or headaches from the glutathione. And that is because of various reasons. But you need to be really looking at the recycling of your glutathione as well. And there's a lot to that. Kyla, when I say folic acid, I mean folic acid. So that's, if I say folic acid, it's exactly what I mean. If I say folate, that's an umbrella term. Folate encompasses methylfolate, folinic acid, and folic acid, unfortunately. But if I say folic acid, I mean folic acid. And I can see that confusion, Kyla, with that, because you hear folic acid all the time from your doctor or from the lab. Lab companies will do this as well. They'll say folic acid, but they actually don't mean folic acid. They mean folate, and specific types of folate, like folinic, folinic or methylfolate. So there's a lot of confusion around there. But folic acid, I mean synthetic, man-made folic acid. Linda, you can absolutely use your old StrateGene report with this webinar series for sure. You might have enough information with your old StrateGene report, but it might drive you to say, man, I really want to get the new one as well. So purple, Lynn, means an inhibitor. So the webinar 1, I went through all that. So I highly recommend. So folks, this is the second webinar in this series. And so my team, if you want to make sure that you're not lost, we went through all the purple stuff and the green stuff and all the genes, and we went through some really high level basic information in the first webinar. And so I don't want to repeat that information. So that is in webinar 1, and you can get that. It is fully recorded and you can access it. Yeah, but I'll just briefly state again. So the red words that you see here, like NH4 or reactive nitrogen species, these are damaging. They are harmful. So they can be reactive nitrogen species, they could be reactive oxygen species, they could be hydrogen peroxide, they could be ammonia, but they're basically, you need to think, oh, red, that's something that my body needs to keep at a low level, or it needs to eliminate them, okay? And it'll just keep them at a safe level, because too much is going to be causing a lot of problems. The orange, as you see here, is things that make the gene or the enzyme work faster. So it enhances the effect of that particular gene or the enzyme. Purple will slow that particular gene or enzyme down. It will reduce its ability to perform. Green, as in the B6 here, is the nutrient that is needed in order to make that enzyme function. And genes make enzymes, and enzymes need vitamins or minerals called cofactors in order to function. If you don't have the green, then that gene or enzyme, that gene produces enzymes, that enzyme won't function. So, and the black is the substrate or the end product. So you could have all the cofactor you want, you could have all the orange stuff to make the enzyme work faster, and you could have a reduced purple stuff. But if you don't have enough substrate, say your homocysteine is too low, your homocysteine is a 3, that could be a problem, and your ability to produce glutathione is not very good. So the black is what the genes, or the enzymes rather, use in order to function. So it's like if you want to make a salad and you don't have any lettuce or tomatoes, well, you're going to be kind of hurting, right? To make a salad, you could have the salad dressing, you could have the fork, you could have the bowl, you could have your hunger, but if you don't have the key ingredients, nothing's going to be made. All right, so this is a pathway called the Biopterin pathway, and Biopterin is something that is not as exciting. It's not as discussed as much, unfortunately, but it is an extremely important pathway. And when you order your StrateGene genetic test, we give you a copy of the Dirty Genes book. And I do talk about a lot of this stuff on a high level so you can understand that. So if you read your Dirty Genes book and you watch the Dirty Genes course, which is an extension of the book, and then you look at your StrateGene and you attend these webinars, you're going to be solid. I mean, the amount of information you're going to get and the ability for you to make decisions which are going to support your health is going to be phenomenal. And it makes me super excited. And I hear feedback from many of you, which is incredible. And some of you are still struggling. And hey, we're all learning on this. This is something that will never, ever stop in terms of complexity. And the more we know, the more we realize we don't know. But with Biopterin, this is how it's made, okay? And Biopterin is a necessary cofactor needed to make your neurotransmitters for your thinking and your emotions, for reacting, for thinking and concentrating and remembering. It's massively important. And then Biopterin is also needed to make something called nitric oxide, and you need that to keep your hands and your feet warm. So if you're sitting there listening to this and your hands and feet are cold, you could be low in Biopterin, and you could also be low in Biopterin if you're really struggling to focus or pay attention with this. But it's also just new and it's kind of overwhelming. But with the recording, you can always stop and go back and re-listen. But Biopterin is a very, very important cofactor, and this is how it's made. And these are the genes which use it. So the NOS3 gene uses Biopterin, the tryptophan to make your 5-HTP, which goes to serotonin, uses Biopterin. Here it is right here. And then your tyrosine goes to L-DOPA to make your L-dopamine, which then feeds into your norepinephrine and epinephrine. So again, you could have all the substrate of 5-HTP of tryptophan and tyrosine and arginine. But if you have high blood pressure, your moods are bad or depressed, and you're just not cognitively strong, then you could have weak levels or low levels of Biopterin, and you need to be looking at your Biopterin pathways. And there are individuals who have a reduced ability to synthesize Biopterin because these particular genes were born dirty. They're slower, or they're deficient in these nutrients and cofactors, and or they have high levels of inflammation, and it's depleting all their Biopterin. So, but this is how Biopterin is made, and you're going to see BH4, this these green word right here, BH4, and BH4. You're going to see this on your serotonin pathway, and you're going to see it on your dopamine pathway. And that's really important to remember. And again, we have these pathways separated, but they're intertwined, because where does GTP come from? The folate pathway. What? So yes. So if you see something that says here from folate pathway, you can go back and here it is. So here's the GTP. And then we said to Biopterin formation. So we give you hints right on your pathways. So if you don't have sufficient folate, or your MTHFD1 genes are not functioning very well, you're not consuming sufficient folate, then your ability to synthesize GTP, which then feeds into your Biopterin pathway, as you can see here, is going to be a problem, because GTP is a primary building block. It's the lettuce for your salad. And if you don't have sufficient folate, your ability for neurotransmitter production is going to be struggling. BH4 is, I discussed it in the book briefly in Dirty Genes. Supplementing with BH4 is not something that I recommend. If you try to buy supplemental BH4 in the USA, A, it's illegal because it's not FDA approved. B, it is a prescription drug. It's extremely expensive. And if you do not have these genes working very well, so if you supplement with BH4 right here, but you have all this purple stuff right here, or you don't have sufficient riboflavin or these other cofactors, you're still not going to make sufficient nitric oxide. And over here, you could have sufficient, you could be supplementing or taking a prescription for BH4, but if you have exposures to mold or you don't have sufficient iron levels, still not going to work. Or you could have oxidative stress, and you can see right here, Biopterin, in the presence of oxidative stress, it gets damaged. And so here's that red BH2. So you could be taking the prescription, but if you are low in antioxidants, you're just destroying that BH4 in your body instantly. So you've got to have the whole picture, and you have to support your body with antioxidants and glutathione and support the glutathione pathway. And that's why these pathways are so useful, because it gives you the bigger picture. Perhaps you have been supplementing with that illegal BH4, or the doctor has prescribed the Biopterin for you, and it worked initially for maybe a week or maybe even a month, and then it stopped working. Well, you gotta look at the whole picture. This is the dirty genes pathway. This is the first pathway you see when you get your StrateGene report. And this is an overview of how the Super 7 in the book are born for you. So we don't have them labeled in terms of genetics here. We just show you the genes. But you'll see later in the presentation where the speed indicators will indicate if it's working faster or slower genetically in terms of how you were born. But this gives you a higher level picture of how the folate pathway feeds into your SAM pathway, which feeds into your glutathione pathway, which then supports your dopamine and your histamine pathways and your Biopterin pathways. And so this is just kind of an overview slide to give you an understanding. Well, these Super 7 genes are really, really important. They feed a lot of stuff going on, and they interact with each other. And so that was my goal when I made this pathway. It's extremely oversimplified, but that's also very useful to give you a good understanding of where you should be really focusing in terms of a basic of understanding of how things work together. So folate feeds into your methylation cycle, which feeds into your glutathione pathway, and the glutathione pathway feeds into all the other pathways because the glutathione keeps them clean. If you don't have sufficient glutathione, you're going to have a dirty NOS3, you're going to have a dirty MAO-A and a dirty histamine pathway and a dirty COMT dopamine pathway as well. BH4 and Biopterin are the same thing. Yes, there's tetrahydrobiopterin, which is BH4, and then a lot of people just call Biopterin or tetrahydrobiopterin Biopterin. There's also called dehydrobiopterin, which is BH2, and there's other ones. There's Neopterin as well, which is kind of oxidized or a form of Biopterin that gets converted into for your immune system. Catherine, go ahead and post again. Sorry, there's so many questions flying through here. Oh, I see your question here, Catherine. On the histamine pathway and the binding side of things. So Catherine, we addressed that in presentation 1. So webinar 1, we discussed it. But yes, if you see anything purple on a gene or a receptor, if it's on a receptor, it's going to be reducing your body's ability to bind whatever that is. So if you see purple on a histamine receptor, that means it's going to prevent that histamine receptor from binding histamine. Okay. I don't want to throw more confusion, so I'm just going to stop it there. So in terms of what SAM does and what glutathione does and what Biopterin does, Biopterin is abbreviated as BH4. This is kind of a simple chart for referencing. And all of this is on your StrateGene report and your pathways, but we're also putting it in a different format for you. Sometimes people learn better visually in a diagram. Other people want to see lists. And so what we're trying to do is support everybody's different learning styles. So with SAM, it's supported with a folate pathway, and it's needed for these particular genes. These genes all end in MT. See that? COMT, PEMT, And why that is, because these are methyltransferase genes. They transfer a methyl group, and that methyl group comes from SAM. So S-adenosyl methionine, okay? And so SAMe is needed to support any of these MTs. So if you see an MT gene, something MT, the likelihood that that particular gene uses SAMe is very high. Glutathione, supported by your methylation pathway, your SAM pathway, and then it's needed to clean up a lot of garbage that is generated by your body to clean these up. And what's interesting is we produce hydrogen peroxide. Our own bodies produce this. And you're going to see that all over your StrateGene report. And I'm going to give you examples here shortly. And if you don't have sufficient glutathione, when you get stressed out, you make a lot of hydrogen peroxide. When you're breaking down histamine, you're producing hydrogen peroxide. And so when you're breaking down neurotransmitters, you're producing a lot of aldehydes and ammonias. And these are all toxic. And so you have to have the cleanup crew to keep things clean. And glutathione is a big, big part of that. In Biopterin, it's supported by the folate pathway, and it's needed for, as we discussed earlier, nitric oxide and neurotransmitters. Mary, most of your SNPs are on the Biopterin pathway. How does this affect downstream? You remember, folks, anytime you have a SNP on your genes, it does not define that gene is working all the time that way. It's just showing you what it's susceptible to. So if you have a genetic variant in your Biopterin pathway or your folate pathway that is slower, that means it was born slower, but it does not mean it's necessarily working slowly all the time. It's just, it's susceptible to working slowly. And you can, or if it's susceptible to working faster, it could also be faster. So downstream, if you have a slower Biopterin, then you might have a reduced ability to synthesize neurotransmitters or produce nitric oxide. So it's pretty significant. So you need to really, really keep those genes clean and support them. So a lot of people, when they get their genetic reports, they want to know what supplements they should take. And I get it. You know, you see a SNP and you think, okay, how can I fix that? Because we're fixers, especially us men. And so you want to back up first, because if you just supplement all the time, it could be just a simple lifestyle change which could transform many of your pathways. Stress is a big one. Infections is another one. So, and you can't supplement necessarily to relieve stress. Turning off mainstream news would probably be a pretty good way to reduce stress. I mean, that the amount of fear that's going on in mainstream media right now is over the top. Or maybe it's not anxiety or fear, but it's irritation or anger. And I notice my moods will shift if I'm watching mainstream news. I'll just get pissed, and that dirties my genes. So you have to realize that every action or choice that you make or decision that you make is going to either clean or dirty your genes. It's going to do one of two things. It's going to clean them or dirty them. And if it does nothing, that's cleaning them. So you got to realize that every single action that you take is doing one of two things, cleaning or dirtying your genes. And so if you just run to supplement, you're probably not going to have a very good success rate. And I know a lot of reports out there that just talk about supplements, and they're doing you an injustice, I believe. So metabolism here, understanding how your histamine and your dopamine is metabolized is very, very important, because a lot of you are taking medications, or a lot of you are taking supplements to support your mood or to support your concentration or support your sleep. And you need to know what happens when your body is breaking these compounds down or producing them. So anytime your body produces neurotransmitters, let's say you get, pissed off, somebody just really makes you mad. You're driving down the freeway and they just almost hit your car, and they take off and they're swerving and they're on their cell phone watching YouTube. And then your kids are screaming in the back, fighting over who's going to, sit in the left window versus the right window. I mean, you're just over the top, you're late for work, and your cell phone just dropped on the floor and it's underneath the gas pedal. So, I mean, all this stuff is going on at the same time, right? You feel me? It happens, especially us parents. So if you understand all that, and you get stressed out and you make the neurotransmitters, but your body has to break those neurotransmitters down. And it's called metabolism. So anytime you're breaking something down, that's metabolizing it. So if you're breaking your dopamine down or you're breaking your histamine down, you're metabolizing your histamine, you're metabolizing your dopamine. And that could be a very good thing. So if you're having seasonal allergies, your body's not metabolizing the histamine very well. It's staying in high levels. And so you're getting the hay fever, you're getting the itchy eyes, you're getting the insomnia and the irritability. And so your body is stuck. It's not metabolizing it. And if you have a slow ability to metabolize these things, a myriad of symptoms is going to happen. Myriad, tons of them. And so you need to be looking at the whole picture. The nutrients and the supplements is important to understand, but the environment in which you're living in, the lifestyle in which you're using or choosing to do, and the chemicals that are surrounding you on a day-to-day basis, moment-to-moment basis at that. I was just in an airplane flying back. I mean, literally got back yesterday. So our airplanes are on the runway, they're about to take off. They just pump in all that toxic air, right? And that's just awful. So, there's environmental exposures are a huge, huge issue. And another one that is underappreciated is infections and gut issues. And this slide is very, very important to understand, because if you have any form of gut dysbiosis or gut imbalance in terms of maybe it's too much probiotics or a sluggish gallbladder or a removed gallbladder you've got an overgrowth of certain bacteria or you've got a variety of different viral infections that are acting up right now for you because you've been stressed out and not taking care of yourself because you've been helping someone else instead of yourself. A lot of moms do that. Caretakers do that. We tend to help others versus ourselves. I'm guilty of that. But if you have infections or gut issues, that is going to cause a systemic problem in every single one of your pathways across the board. But how do you get those infections? Do you just go out and you kill them? Do you run out and take olive leaf extract or oil of oregano or, take some antibiotics? Well, you maybe, you talk with a health professional about that, but stress is a big one. If you are, sucking in a bunch of chemicals in the environment, that's going to be using up a lot of nutrients and reducing your body's ability to perform, which is going to let, the viruses be able to overtake you. You're not going to be absorbing your nutrients very well, which then is going to also reduce the nutrients that you need in order to combat stress. And it becomes this vicious feed-forward cycle, which is going to predispose you to more infections and more gut issues. So stressors are a big one. And I don't mean to be patronizing with the stress, because I know it's tough. But if you can identify right now 3 things which are stressing you out and write them down that you haven't really taken action on, that's a mental stressor and a physical stressor. So if you can write down 3 things right now, what is a mental stressor that you're struggling with, and you can share if you want to with someone or with all of us, because if you share the things that are bugging you and know that this is not private, so if you don't want to share something, then don't. But if you write it down and you say that you're going to tackle it, the likelihood of you taking action on that is more likely, right? So the things that I know that stress me out is watching mainstream media. And so I'm removing myself even more from that because I got caught up on that with COVID. I took a vacation with my family. That was important for me, and that was huge. So I made a concerted effort to go on vacation. That was a choice. It was expensive. It pulled me away from the company. It pulled me away from routine around here, made me behind in certain things, but it made me ahead in terms of, overall health and love and being together with my family. So that was really, really important. Another one that I'm going to be working on is eating. And, a stressor for me I'm about 8 pounds overweight right now. So I'm working out again. And which I'm excited about. So these 3 genes we're going to be focusing a lot on. We're going to be diving in some really good examples for you, which are, we're diving in right now really, really targeted. But don't forget that the Dirty Genes concept is general. So read the book Dirty Genes if you haven't yet. And if you haven't bought it and you want to jump on board and get the new StrateGene, then you can get that. And you're going to get the Dirty Genes book with it. So don't buy the book if you are going to get the StrateGene genetic test, because you're going to get the book with it. Okay. And if you did buy it already, well, you can just gift it to someone who needs it, because we all need to clean our genes. But these 3 genes are really, really important. And you've no doubtedly talked, or read it with MAO-A and MAO-B and COMT, because we discussed these 2 in the book. We did not discuss aldehyde dehydrogenase genes, ALDH genes. And these are really, really important. So histamine is associated with these things in terms of negativity, right? These are the dirty, reduced ability to eliminate histamine. These are the reduced ability to metabolize neurotransmitters or even synthesize them. Okay, if you're not able to synthesize specific neurotransmitters, you could have attention issues, you could have depression, and other things. And if they also, the aldehyde, MAO-B, and COMT also tie into hormones, but we do not have a hormone planner at the time. We are working on it. Andrea, you already have the book and the course. Can you purchase the StrateGene report by itself? The StrateGene report comes with the StrateGene genetic test. And the genetic test, we give you the course and the book on top of it. Is actually a gift. There's no additional cost with that. Full disclosure, the original price for the StrateGene genetic test was $395. And, I didn't really like that. I wanted to price it lower as much as I could. The $395 price point was determined for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of expense with this test, a lot of development, a lot of costs. But let's say, let's make it $295. So we are legitimately giving you the course and the book for free at our own cost. So it's not less expensive for you to get the test on its own. So just gift them. So the job of the aldehyde dehydrogenase enzyme is to basically get rid of, metabolize aldehydes. And where are aldehydes? They're everywhere. Your body makes them in pretty significant amounts. You breathe them in pretty significant amounts. You are getting them through perfumes. You are getting them through combustion of gases. You're getting them from drinking alcohol. You're getting them when you get stressed out and break down your neurotransmitters. You're getting them when you have a high histamine response or histamine. I got to be careful here. I have to look on the pathways, and I'll get there in a second. But we show you some sources of aldehydes as well. But if you're cooking and you don't have the flue, or not the flue, but the vent sucking out the oxidized air that you're making from cooking, from the oils that you're cooking, that is a huge problem, and you're breathing aldehydes. And I talk about that in the Dirty Genes course. So if you haven't watched the Dirty Genes course yet, watch it. You can watch it. There's like 10 different videos. The majority of them are about 15 minutes long, so you can just watch one, take action on whatever you've learned, and maybe watch the next one a week later or so on, and take action on what you've learned and rinse and repeat. But aldehydes are a huge issue, and they diffuse easily through your cell membranes, and they bind to things and they destroy them. So aldehydes can bind to your glutathione. Aldehydes can bind to your homocysteine. Aldehydes can bind to various different things, and they disturb their function. It becomes very, very problematic. So you've got to get rid of aldehydes. And what gets rid of them? Niacin. And what are you hearing from a lot of people? Don't take niacin because it messes up your methylation. And how do you get rid of methylation side effects? Well, you take niacin. So does methylation support increase aldehydes? Sometimes. It's a bigger picture than that, but we can't get in a vacuum and think, oh, I have high homocysteine. I can't take any niacin because it's going to disturb my methylation or it's going to drive my homocysteine higher. Well, if you take 5 grams of homocysteine or 5 grams of niacin, yeah, it could definitely cause issues. But taking 50 to 100 milligrams of niacin is not going to be driving your homocysteine up. Takes a lot. Niacin is really, really important. Rhonda, NAD. Niacin makes NAD. So nicotinic acid can help form NAD, and your body converts tryptophan into NAD. Seeking Health does not sell NAD because I don't think we should, because your body can make it pretty well, and you can make more NAD by fasting, or you can just take niacin. So I may change my tune on that later, but NAD, the price point of it, I'm just not a fan. You can get good benefit from fasting, exercise, and taking niacin. So here's how your aldehydes are produced, okay? So aldehydes, you say you consume alcohol, it gets broken down in acetaldehyde. That acetaldehyde has to be metabolized. Again, there's that word, broken down into acetate. And acetate, you basically just pee it out, okay? And acetone, you can breathe out. So if you do not have sufficient aldehyde dehydrogenase available, that's going to be a problem. See, this individual drank some alcohol. They converted it by this particular gene. They made an aldehyde, but they broke it down in acetic acid, normal alcohol metabolism. This individual had some alcohol. They metabolized it in acetaldehyde just fine, but their ALDH2 gene, their aldehyde dehydrogenase gene, is working slowly. See, they're not making much acetic acid, which is driving higher amounts of acetaldehyde, which is going to be causing them problems. So these are the sources. Elizabeth made a great slide here for you of various different aldehydes in your environment. This is a key slide, which you might want to take a photo with your cell phone and avoid these things, limit them. If you are wearing perfume or cologne, or you're driving an old car with bad emissions, or you're driving down the road and you see black exhaust coming out from a diesel truck or so on, you want to roll your window up and turn on that air recycling feature in your car. And I do that constantly. I will roll my window down when I'm on an empty road and it's flat. My windows will go up and I'll hit the recycling button when I'm going up a hill or I'm following a stinky car. And I will mess with those buttons the whole time I'm driving. So it's really important to minimize exposure, because one exposure like that can drive your aldehydes up, which then can mess up a lot of things. So these symptoms are so common. And look at these symptoms. Do you have them? Do you have kind of brain fog or fatigue or headaches? These issues, folks, I mean, how many of you are struggling with any of these or multiple of them? I do. So your body makes aldehydes, and you're going to see them here firsthand. So this is just a summary slide to transition into to show you what we're going to be diving into. But aldehydes are made by your histamine breaking down and your neurotransmitters breaking down. And the aldehydes are bad news. I mean, they are bad, and they contribute to major issues here. You know, if you have aldehydes, making problems with your glutathione, that's going to mess up all your pathways, right? Just there is going to link to all of these. So let's dive into it. And here's the link for the research paper. So if you click these links, it will then take you to the full research and you can read it on your own. Or if your doctors are doubting you or your health professionals doubting you, you can cite research for you. We cite the research for you so you can share it with them. Can you get niacin through food? Absolutely. Absolutely, Linda. Great websites for food is WH Foods, World Healthiest Foods website is great. Linus Pauling Institute is another great website. There's Chronometer is an app that you can get on your phone, and Chronometer is great for that. And there's a lot of other things. So here's the current histamine pathway for the new StrateGene. So the old histamine pathway was not as detailed, and we only had just a couple variants on the old StrateGene. So if you've had the old StrateGene pathway, this is going to look different and more thorough. And we also reported only DAO sometimes, depending on which 23andMe or Ancestry you used. We only reported MAO-A and B, and then NAT2, but we didn't report any of these other ones. So the new StrateGene is going to be way more comprehensive because we test the ALDH genes for you, which are huge. hugely important in understanding if they're slower. And I will tell you, it is commonly slow. So this ALDH gene right here is commonly slow in the population. My wife has a slow DAO and a slow ALDH, and that is a big problem for her, and she has a huge problem with her histamine. So if you have a high histamine level and you are trying to reduce the histamine, and we talk about this in the first webinar as well, and others, a lot of you are going to be trying to reduce the high histamine containing foods, and you're going to be trying to take SAMe, and you're going to be taking DAO enzyme and all these different things. But it could be just your ALDH gene that is the problem. It's remember the drain, the image of the drain right here. So there's a reason for there's the drain there, because in order for your body to function, the drain has to be completely open and free flowing. So if this drain is clogged or reduced in its ability to perform and eliminate things or metabolize things, you're going to have issues. And what's going to happen here is if this gene at the very, very bottom, which is the drain, then what's going to happen is these aldehydes in red. See these red? And see what it says here? Feedback inhibitor to HNMT. What does that mean? I'll discuss this in webinar 1. But feedback inhibitor means it's going to slow this particular gene right here. And if this particular gene can't work, what happens to your histamine? Go ahead and answer. What is going to happen if this particular gene right here, the ALDH family gene, so family means there's a family of aldehyde dehydrogenase genes, there's a whole bunch of them. And if this particular gene is slower and you get higher levels of this red word here, this acetaldehyde, and it says feedback inhibitor to HNMT, what's going to happen to your histamine levels? What do you think, folks? What's going to happen to your histamine if your aldehydes are high? This is really, really, really important that you get this. Really important. Inflammation, higher histamine levels will trigger more inflammation. That is true. That's one of histamine's job, and it's a good thing. But in excess, it's bad. But what will happen to histamine, Linda? All right, so your histamine will go up. Yeah, you all got that. Who commented? So, and feel confident to share. If you're wrong, it's okay to be wrong, and you learn by making an informed statement. So if you think it was going to go down, well, that's important for me to say, okay, well, maybe I'm doing a bad job, giving you, instructing you, so that I need to figure something out here. So if I'm seeing answers that are wrong, then it's on me, not on you, okay? So, but if your ALDH gene, the drain, is clogged, then your histamine levels are going to go up. So the comments of the theories of overmethylation and undermethylation is nonsense, just complete nonsense if you think about aldehydes and their impact on histamine. Because if you think that you're an undermethylator and you need to take more SAMe, but if you take more SAMe, that's not going to matter because your aldehydes or your drain is clogged. So you've got to open up your aldehyde genes. And so, that is a key. And we're going to be getting into more detail here on that in a second. But the point of this slide is to demonstrate that the very last gene in your pathway, the very bottom one, see the histamine here, and histamine gets processed this way through DAO and through the aldehyde family gene, and it gets peed out. Histamine gets metabolized to HNMT and then through these other genes and then peed out. And if these particular genes are really sluggish, if the ALDH genes are sluggish, where does histamine go? Okay, so this is a more difficult question. And this goes back to how the beginning of this presentation where you learn how your histamine is produced, it's transported, binds to receptors, and then eliminated. So look at this pathway of how histamine is eliminated, and then look at which routes are clogged because your aldehydes genes are dirty. So which gene gets the brunt of all of your histamine if your ALDH family genes are sluggish? Which gene takes the brunt of it? Look at your pathway. It's right in front of you. The answer is in front of you. Get comfortable looking at these pathways because they are the beautiful tool which you're going to be investing in and using. And I want to teach you how to use this. If the acetaldehyde is inhibiting HNMT, we just see the X here, and it's inhibiting the DAO from functioning, where is the histamine going to go? It's going to go in the blood. That's definitely true, Catherine, for sure, because it can't get out, so it's going to go in the blood. It's going to go in the brain. It's going to cause more histamine-related issues, for sure. But none of you have got it. So it can't go. So if this drain is clogged, DAO drain is clogged, and the HNMT drain is clogged, where can histamine go? It can go into storage, follow the arrows, and go into storage, and then it can be released and bound to receptors. That's bad because then it gets histamine activation. So where else can it go? There you go. Carol nailed it. Good job, Carol. Okay, this was a harder question, but I want you to think. Schools do not teach people how to think and reason through things. They just give you the answers. And I don't want to just give you answers. I want you to learn how to reason through your pathways. So if the HNMT is slowed because of this X, because of the aldehydes, and here as well, because the aldehydes feed back, see this purple arrow? This is slowed. So DAO is slowed, HNMT is slowed, histamine is going to go up. Linda was right. It's going to get into your blood. It's going to cause more allergies and cause more irritability, anxiety. But your body is also going to try to still eliminate it. And you can see right here, this minor route. So the major route is through HNMT, but that's slowed because your drain is clogged for the aldehydes. NAT2 gets the brunt of the histamine metabolizing efforts. And so vitamin B5, pantothenic acid, is needed in order to support the minor route of elimination of histamine. Now, there are a lot of things which slow this particular gene down in purple and in the environment as well. So, and if you get your StrateGene report, you're going to see how your NAT2 gene functions. Some of you have a fast ability for that gene to work. Some of you have a slower ability, and some of you have an intermediate ability. And so if it's slower, then you're going to have higher histamine with this HNMT and this DAO, potentially, not set in stone. Does that make sense? So, if those drains are clogged, you're going to get higher histamine in the blood, which is a brilliant response. I missed that one myself. And then what's going to happen is all these things are potential from high histamine. And again, these could be just simple high aldehydes, right? So it doesn't have to be these histamine-containing foods, or maybe you've been following a histamine-containing diet for a long time and it's not working. Maybe it's not infections. Maybe it's your aldehyde genes that are clogged. Now we're going to be diving into the neurotransmitters. And the neurotransmitters this is not discussed nearly enough. And when I was reading research about Parkinson's and Huntington's and dementia and Alzheimer's and a whole bunch of other things with the brain, headaches, migraines, just aging, memory issues, aldehydes are a huge issue in the brain. And here's why. So your dopamine, remember the pathways are broken down into sections, and now those circles are gone, okay? This is the elimination route, the metabolism. This is the formation of your dopamine. This is the transport of your dopamine. This is your binding of your dopamine and the reabsorption, okay? So here's the elimination of your dopamine. So let's say that you have a faster COMT. You've read the book Dirty Genes. You have a fast COMT. Or maybe your child has a fast COMT. You supplemented with tyrosine to help support that. And now their ability to focus has been great. Their ability to concentrate and get work done is awesome. Their moods are better. And that's been going on for maybe a couple months, 2 months. And as I described in the book Dirty Genes, I use my own son as an example here. So if a little bit is good, more is better, right? So Tasman started taking 1,000 or 1,500 milligrams of tyrosine instead of the 500 originally. And he wasn't eating protein either. Tyrosine comes from protein. So he was producing higher amounts of dopamine, causing more irritability. And you can read that in the book in the COMT chapter. But dopamine also has to get metabolized. And so he was struggling with some headaches as well. And so Dopal is nasty stuff. And this is the major route. It's a little blurred over, but this is the major route of dopamine elimination. And so dopal can go up, which is toxic, and dopagal down here can also go up from the metabolism of your epinephrine or your norepinephrine, okay? So these aldehydes are bad. And so if your ALDH gene right here, highlighted in purple, are sluggish, then dopal levels go up and your dopagal levels go up. So do you think that if your ALDH gene is slower, is that toxic aldehyde going to do something bad to your brain? Absolutely. Yes, it will. And aldehydes need to be dealt with. And so you've got to be supporting the function of this ALDH2 gene. And in StrateGene, you'll be able to click this ALDH2 and see that and read about it in your report, and we give you insights about lifestyle, environment, food, and nutrients, supplements to use. Now, here's a scenario with let me go back, make sure I didn't miss something. So here's an individual with a slow ALDH2, okay? So if this particular individual has a slower ALDH2, you can see this in purple, dopal goes up and dopagal goes up. Now let's add a little bit of complexity to it. So now we've added a slower COMT and a faster MAO-A or a faster MAO-B. So we're increasing in complexity as we go, okay? So what's going to happen if with a faster MAO-A and a slow COMT or a slow ALDH2? What do you think is going to happen with the dopal and the dopagal, and why? So what's going to happen with a fast MAO-A, fast MAO-B, and a slower ALDH2 and a slower COMT? What's going to happen to people's dopals and dopagals? Okay, so if these levels go up, that's a bad thing, right? The brain is going to have problems. It's going to be basically eaten alive. And if you do brain scans of people who have dementia or Parkinson's, you're going to literally see holes in their brains. It's not pretty. Dr. Daniel Amen does SPECT scans, and SPECT scans are amazing in terms of seeing the health of the brain visually. It's really cool. So if you have higher levels of these aldehydes in your brain, it's going to chew holes and destroy it. So a combination of a fast MAO-A, fast MAO-B, and a slower ALDH genes and a slower COMT gene is going to increase the production of that. Now, I want to state, if you are born with a fast MAO-A or a fast MAO-B and a slow ALDH2 and a slow COMT, it is not defining that you have these higher levels in your brain. It is not definitive. It is saying that you are increased susceptibility. That's all it's saying. You have an increased susceptibility to have higher aldehydes. And it doesn't say that if you have a slower MAO-A or slower MAO-B and a fast COMT and a fast ALDH2, that you're low in aldehydes. Do not think that your genes are set in stone. We're showing your susceptibilities, and you need to understand that if you have all these symptoms of that we shared earlier, and you're struggling with these symptoms, and you look at your StrateGene report, and you're like, oh, my ALDH gene was born fast, actually, and my MAO-A, B, and B genes are born slow, so I shouldn't have any aldehyde problems. No. Wrong. It's you have to have the holistic picture. Okay, so the genes are one look of it. That's all. And these genes function, they can change in their ability to perform on a day-to-day basis, a moment-to-moment basis. And MAO-A is also producing huge amounts of hydrogen peroxide. See this in red? And ammonia. Hydrogen peroxide, ammonia, hydrogen peroxide, ammonia, hydrogen peroxide, ammonia. Glutathione pathway. You've got to be understanding your glutathione pathway, and you've got to be utilizing glutathione supplementation or sauna, or avoiding chemicals or precursors of your glutathione, which we discussed in your StrateGene report, like broccoli sprouts are great. So here's an individual who has a intermediate speed MAO-A, a faster MAO-B, and a slower ALDH2, and a slower COMT. So this is exactly the picture that we just discussed. For this individual has a increased susceptibility for higher levels of dopal. And if you go back in history and you say, hey, do you have history of Parkinson's in your family or Alzheimer's or dementia? And they say, yeah, my mom had it, my grandma had it, my uncle had it, and my father and so on. My older brother is showing signs of it. That could be genetic traits, right? There could be some genetic susceptibilities there. And so are you just going to wait around and say, okay, well, I'm next? Or you're going to be looking at your StrateGene report, try to uncover some holes and see which genes are functioning faster or slower, so then you can make some educated decisions and say, okay, well, now that I know my ALDH2 gene is slow, I'm going to be taking some efforts and actions to help prevent that or reduce its slowness, and I can speed it up as well by the actions that I'm taking, and as we all define in your StrateGene report, and we'll dive into at the end here as well. So again, more research articles for you. Now, Dopagol is in the epi-norepi pathway, and a dirty MAO-A is the primary driver, okay? So here's MAO-A right here, and you can see this individual has a intermediate typical speed of their MAO-A gene, but they can still be producing high amounts of Dopagol, right? So if they're stressed out all the time, think about that. If you're stressed out all the time, or you're exercising all the time, you're going to be producing higher levels of epinephrine. And so if you're producing higher levels of epinephrine, you haven't been taking vacations, you haven't been sleeping, you've been training too much, you've been stressed out, watching the news constantly, dealing with people who just irritate you, your boss is a punk, your coworkers are lazy, and you're putting all the work on you, you're taking all this stress, you're making huge amounts of epinephrine, you're also making huge amounts of Dopagol, regardless of if your MAO-A gene is typically slow, intermediate speed or not, okay? You have higher levels of Dopagol. If you're on vacation, you're relaxed, you're smiling, you're laughing, you listen to comedy instead of mainstream media, and you're hanging out with people that love and support you and push you to get better, then perhaps your Dopagol levels are going to be at a better amount. So this is the serotonin pathway. So we're going to be painting a picture here of a slow aldehyde dehydrogenase gene. So here it is, a slower gene right here, which is going to drive up the 5-HIAL, which is another aldehyde. It's toxic. And so this particular gene is potentially slower in an individual, and it can be slower for various reasons. Maybe they're low in niacin, maybe they have higher levels of reactive oxygen species, or higher levels of acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde comes from where? Yeast overgrowth, alcohol. So if you're consuming alcohol, or if you have yeast overgrowth in your gut, or you're cooking with oxidized oils, you're not using ghee, you're not using avocado oil, you're not using the hood when you're cooking, and you're not sucking out the toxic fumes, you're sucking in a lot of aldehydes, and you're going to be making yourself moody, irritable, brain fog, and tired. Here you are busting your butt in the kitchen, set a new Year's resolution and goal to cook more, but you've been lighting up the gas stove using sunflower oil or some cheap oils, or maybe you're making some efforts, but they're not high smoke point oils, but you're not using the hood to suck out all those fumes. You're exposing yourself to aldehydes, and you're making yourself feel worse. Use the hood when you cook. I know it's noisy, I know it's annoying, but you've got to use the hood when you cook. You got to suck those aldehydes out into the environment and away from your brain. Again, a need for glutathione. So your serotonin pathway, it kills your serotonergic neurons. That's bad. Okay, it kills your brain. It eats it. That's why you see holes in your brain with SPECT scans. This stuff is nasty. Here's an individual who has been born with a slower ALDH2 gene, as identified with the StrateGene report. You can see the speed indicator here. It's slower. So that 5-HIAL can't go that way. This individual has the ADH genes that are functioning typically. So there's no variants found. They were tested, no genetic variants found. However, this is the minor route. See that? This is the minor route. This is the major route. So the main route to eliminate this toxic aldehyde is slowed down for this individual. So now she or he has an increased susceptibility to higher levels of toxic aldehydes in her brain, okay, or his brain. And that's a problem. And MAO-B is faster in this individual. This is the minor routes. And the major routes here is typical speed. So I want you looking at your StrateGene report and paying attention to all the words on your pathway. Every single word on your StrateGene report on your pathway is important. Every single one, or we would not have put it there. We've been very, very efficient and very, very selective at the words that we put on every single pathway. So if you see a word on a pathway, it's important. Pay attention to it. And it's going to take time. And I'm still finding things which I'm learning from the report all the time. So this individual has an increased susceptibility. It's not set in stone, but they have an increased susceptibility to toxic aldehydes in the brain. So we've got to make sure that they support the elimination of that. See, and it's a lifetime of things, right? Parkinson's disease does not happen overnight. It's a gradual onset. Your brain is amazingly plastic in terms of being able to heal itself, and you can do a lot to heal it. And so if you are struggling with a lot of symptoms now, you can work with health professionals who know this and who can help you out and improve your symptoms. It may not completely go away, but it may reduce the speed in which it's occurring, and you may actually be able to reverse it depending on the level of severity, and you may also be able to prevent it. So, but it takes information, and StrateGene provides you a lot of information. So these slow aldehyde dehydrogenase genes cause these problems as before, and this is how you support them, okay? These are the problems. This is how you support the ALDH gene. And all this is in your StrateGene report. This is just summarized because, again, some of you learn from reading the report on your own. Some of you want tables and lists like this. And so we're providing you, a comprehensive approach to support your learning style. Okay. Now, does this mean that you're going to run out and buy a bunch of supplements and herbs to support your ALDH genes? Well, it can be helpful, yes, but I don't want you to do that first. I really want you to focus on the environment first. You breathe 11,000 liters of air every day. 11,000 liters of air every single day. So if your air is dirty, full of aldehydes, and you're cooking a lot, or you're at restaurants a lot, well, not nowadays with COVID, but if you're cooking and you don't have that hood on and you're not sucking out those fumes, that's a huge, huge burden on your aldehyde genes. And alcohol is a big one. And even if you don't drink alcohol, you have yeast. If you have yeast in your gut, your yeast are producing alcohol for you. Yes. Yeast overgrowth is a big, big issue. And then medications, right? If you're on these meds, it's going to be an issue as well. And food, these are really supportive if you cook them properly. So here it is right here, Candida, right? I didn't know this. Females have a lower activity of the alcohol dehydrogenase gene. So the ADH gene, women have a slower functioning gene naturally. And then the activity reduces with age in both men and women. So that is interesting. And the cofactor support is niacin and zinc, and it's on your pathways as well. You don't have to remember all this. It's all in your report as well. So here's that same diagram that you looked at before. Here's that ADH gene, which is slower in women. Acetaldehyde, which is produced by yeast overgrowth and also consumed or produced through cooking or drinking alcohol. And so if this is reduced in function, then you have higher ethanol in your blood, which is also a problem. So you just have to do a full picture. So a slow ADH1B here, this is a minor route for this, but it's still, if this is slower, it's going to increase the 5-HIAL, that toxic aldehyde, and it's definitely going to increase the toxic aldehyde if your ALDH is also slower. So if these genes are slow and this gene is slow, then those toxic aldehydes are going to be way up, right? Especially if you have a faster MAO-A or a faster MAO-B. Makes sense? We've talked about that drain. If the incoming water is really fast in the bathtub and the drain is slow, eventually that's going to overflow and there's going to be water all over the floor. If you have a lot of serotonin in your brain because you've taken 5-HTP or your doctor's got you on SSRIs, or you're eating a bunch of tryptophan, these feel-good foods because of COVID and you're stressed out, you could be having this higher amounts of serotonin in your brain, which then is going to be metabolized and it's be converted by your MAO-B genes, look on your pathway, and then it's going to be converting into aldehydes. And if that drain is clogged, if the ALDH family of genes are clogged and the ADH genes are clogged and the aldehydes are going to go up, you're going to have issues, okay? Remember, it's going to be going, it's not just in your serotonin pathway, is it? It's also in your histamine pathway. It's also in your dopamine pathway. So you gotta keep that in mind. You're looking at one pathway right now, but just remember that the ALDH2 gene is also on your histamine pathway, your dopamine pathway, and the serotonin pathway. And here's how you support it and supportive research to help you out. So in summary, you got to keep the ALDH and ADH genes clean, period. I mean, these you got to keep the drain in your shower free of hair and nasty stuff. You got to keep the sink in your kitchen, free of the drain, free of food. You got to keep the garbage disposal clean instead of jammed, and keeping the forks and the food and the tinfoil and all that stuff from out of there, right? So the dishwasher, if the drain in the dishwasher is clogged, what's going to happen? It's going to flood your house. So you got to keep the drains open in your pathways. And the drains it's not just the ALDH gene in your pathways, it's also the ADH. It's in its other ones as well across your pathways. So look at the most bottom genes in your pathways. Those are your drains. You got to keep them open. So you support them with, stress, reduction, or, supporting your moods is a big one. I cannot emphasize enough that you really, really, of all the different things to focus on, it's two: having a clean environment, and it's having a loving, supportive environment of people around you, and trying to keep the noise of negativity out. If someone is on your butt to improve and get better and grow, that's different than having just constant negative criticism, right? Having constructive criticism to help you to grow it as an individual and push and push and push, which is what I do to my kids and my wife, which I'm reducing. She doesn't like it. So I'm stressing her out, which then increases her viral load of possibly Epstein-Barr, and then I drive her to get sick. So here I am trying to, build her, growth, but then I also hurt her health. So I've learned to back off. I just learned to back off. Some people are good with where they are, and that's where you stay. So stop pushing some people. It took me 20 years to figure that out. Sheridan, what's the most important gene to clean to make sure the body properly eliminates hydrogen peroxide? So hydrogen peroxide is eliminated from glutathione and catalase. So look at your glutathione pathways. I do not like to pin down the most important gene, but I do understand your question. But I would just say glutathione is look at your glutathione pathway. Hydrogen peroxide is metabolized from your glutathione pathway. Look there. And then, but you also want to reduce the production of hydrogen peroxide. So that ties into your stressors, physical stress and mental stress. So overtraining is a big, big problem. Some of you might have more time in your hand because of COVID. Some of you might be stressed out more because of COVID. And so you're running and you're training and you're lifting more. And that over exercise is going to drive higher levels of hydrogen peroxide. Stress is going to be driving mental stress is also. So don't focus on only the elimination, but also focus on the production of, right? So in summary, these are the problems. For these, you've seen this before. And so what this slide is going to do is, which I've been wanting to do the whole presentation, but I've withheld myself because I knew this slide was lurking at the end. But you need to comprehensively support the genes, not just with their, maybe watching how much protein you eat, because protein produces histidine, and then histidine will produce your histamine. So some of you are following a GAPS or paleo or carnivore diet, and you're just chowing on protein, just heaps. And I got a text from, I don't know, some mom, and the son was having high liver enzymes and kidney issues, very bad kidney issues already, according to the labs. And this is a young kid. The kid was 18 or 19 or 20. I think he was 20, actually, older than my oldest. And I've met the kid. And she goes, what am I going to do with this kid? He's been more irritable. He's been really tired. His liver enzymes and his kidney enzymes are really elevated. What's up? And my first question was, any medications? No. I said, is he taking any supplements? Yeah. He's taking these supplements for bodybuilding. I said, oh, what is it? The kid was consuming over 200 grams of protein a day, and his body weight was like 140. So he was consuming way more protein than he needed. So protein is a big, big, big problem. But anyway, so you got to watch how much protein you're consuming, because if you're eating way too much, it could be driving your histamine levels and just burden. But the aldehydes are supported by your zinc and your B3. These are cofactors. The ALDH genes work better if you have sufficient zinc and niacin to make sense, and if there's sufficient hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is produced from your glutathione pathway. You'll see that there. And the ALDH family of genes also work better when there is a reduced amount of oxidative stress or free radicals. You're not taking aspirin or NSAIDs, and you do not have higher oxidized fatty acids. And if you're younger, shoot, I just turned 47 a couple days ago. That's just not going to go away, right? So, but 47 is the new 27. That's how I think about it. I feel great. So if you're taking a bunch of aspirin, that's going to be slowing down and causing histamine issues, won't it? Because if you're taking aspirin, that could be slowing down your ALDH family of genes, especially if you're low in zinc and niacin. And this is replicated over here. So you got to look at the whole picture. Thank you.
A while back, we had someone asking if TCN1 is normal, but TCN2 is slow, does the transportation work adequately for B12?
Great question. So remember, you have to take all this in context. So if you're looking at a particular gene on your StrateGene and you find that it's, one is faster and the other one is typical, or one is slow and the other one's fast, you always have to take your StrateGene report in context. And let me give you an example on that. A health professional wanted me to go over her StrateGene report and give her recommendations. And she sent it to me, and I said, well, this is worthless. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, well, I need to have context. StrateGene itself is not worthless, but I need to have context. So if you do lab testing and you see that your serum B12 levels are, in a normal range, and your MCV, MCH levels are good, they're not elevated, and you don't have any B12 deficient symptoms, your homocysteine is fine, then you could have both TCN1 and 2 slower, but epigenetically or in real life or right now, your ability to transport B12 is working. And on the flip side is, if your serum B12 was higher, you're not supplementing with B12, and you're consuming folic acid, and your homocysteine is a bit higher, that could be indicative of a transcobalamin 1 or 2 problem, either genetically or epigenetically, and you need to figure that out. So, but if you're consuming folic acid, that's an issue. So again, always take your StrateGene report in context. Do not look at your StrateGene report in isolation without an understanding of what's going on. So for example, if I was struggling with insomnia, I couldn't fall asleep, right? I would pull out my StrateGene report and say, okay, I can't fall asleep. Why? What are some things that prevent people from falling asleep? Well, high levels of histamine, high levels of dopamine, high levels of norepinephrine. And I'd look at my StrateGene report and I'd look at these particular genes, and I'd start giving some reasoning. And then I'd look at my nutrients or supplements that I'm taking, the meds I'm taking, which I'm not taking any, but and the foods I'm eating. So always use StrateGene in context with other things.
Great. And then we had some interesting questions, right? So Ben, when we're looking at the histamine pathway, people were a little confused. They're like, look, we have quercetin, and quercetin is being told by people, quercetin and vitamin C, boy, take that if you have elevated histamine because it'll stop the release of the histamine from storage. And yet we're seeing that quercetin is also an inhibitor of NAT2. So what would your answer be to the importance of quercetin inhibiting the NAT2 versus the release?
Well, let's back up again. And this goes back to where, I really want you to learn and increase your confidence of using your StrateGene report and your pathways. You're going to suck at first. I mean, you're legitimately going to suck. If somebody bought me a guitar and dropped it on my couch right now and said, you got to learn how to play that, I'd suck in the beginning. And with practice, I get decent, maybe. I'm not very musically inclined, but give it a go. But you're going to suck in the beginning. So with quercetin, if you are taking quercetin and you get good results, again, always put it in context. So if you are taking quercetin and you feel great, your histamine symptoms are improving, then you're good. Now, if you up your dose of your quercetin and, you start noticing irritability, insomnia, and you actually have an opposite reaction, you're one of those people that say, I'm always opposite of what people expect from this particular nutrient. StrateGene can come in and really give you some insights. So quercetin does not only slow down NAT2, but also slows down your COMT gene. So if it slows down your NAT2, that is the minor route of elimination of your histamine. So keep that in mind. Again, context. So here, histamine, the major route is through HNMT, and the DAO also does it. So as far as we know, based upon research, because every one of these is cited on research, quercetin does not inhibit HNMT as far as we know. But so that's just slowing down the minor route. So you got to make sure that your drain is open, your aldehyde genes are open, as we discussed, your MAO-AB genes are working and your HNMT genes are working, and you're good. Quercetin should be fine. But on the opposite end, not the opposite, but on another pathway, you have to keep in mind that COMT, we don't have it here, but COMT is slowed by quercetin as well, because quercetin, I believe, is a catechol, and COMT stands for catechol O-methyltransferase. So, it can slow that down, and we discussed that in your StrateGene report.
Okay, we have a ton of questions, gang. Thank you so much. Since we are running a little behind on time, let's just take another one here about niacin. So you had mentioned that niacin is important, but I have a person here asking two questions. Number one, it looks like the question is niacinamide as good as niacin? And then they seem to have a flushing with niacin. So I guess the question one would be, is niacinamide as effective as niacin? And the question number two is it problematic to flush? Yeah, all right. So niacinamide, if we look at it and you see that a lot of people do not respond well, then perhaps the niacinamide isn't as good. And what you'll find from Seeking Health is I've been at multiple different supplement companies. I've been a practitioner for 15 years, and I've never seen a niacin work as efficiently and effectively as the Seeking Health niacin. So if you start taking a niacin here and you're taking 30, 50 milligrams at a time and you do find flushing, that's a fantastic result. You're actually seeing that you're getting a positive effect from the niacin. And it, will start as kind of a burning. Some people, it's an itching, and you'll get this sunburn-like effect. You'll look like Ben coming back from Costa Rica. And actually, that's just a prostaglandin release signaling. You're having an increase of circulation. It's not an allergenic response. There's no need to go to your ER. It's actually a fantastic sign that niacin's doing its job.
Yeah, absolutely. And so from experience, I would agree with everything there. I'd like to add a couple more things.
Please.
Some people use niacin prior to sauna for various reasons. But if you are taking niacin, you might also notice your heart rate increasing. You might also get more lightheaded, especially if you're in the sauna. So just be careful. Work with your health professional on these. But if you get lightheaded from niacin or your heart rate increases, maybe you took too much, or just be more mindful of that. So these are two things that I've had people come back to me and say, "Oh, I took some niacin, it really increased my heart rate, and I got dizzy." So it can happen.
Totally. And temperature changes as well, right? Somebody might get really hot and then they might feel really cool afterwards.
Yes. You do have to worry about high dose niacin. We're talking gram doses. Sometimes they're recommended to support cholesterol metabolism in gram doses. We don't really talk about that at Seeking Health much because we don't focus on that. But if your doctor is recommending you to take high dose niacin, in gram doses, you need to make sure that your methylation is being supported. So making sure that you're checking your homocysteine levels. Now, niacinamide, nicotinamide, inositol hexanicotinate, and nicotinic acid, these are all different forms of niacin. I do not know why some people do better on other forms besides just the flushing. But find out what works best for you. I wish I knew more. I have some friends of mine who do really well on nicotinic acid. I have other ones that do poorly, and they do way better on niacinamide. So I'm not sure.
Yes, interesting. Yeah, and the inositol hexaniacinate does not seem to alter a lot of values on labs over time. So that brings us to another question, which is someone's asking, are there any other labs, as you had mentioned, that you would recommend that a practitioner or a client of a practitioner request when they're also getting the StrateGene?
Again, in context. So there's the assortment of labs you can order is exhaustive. It's just tons and tons and tons. So in the back of your StrateGene, or it's in the back of your Dirty Genes book, there's a whole appendix, and it goes by gene. So we have labs that we recommend, along with giving you an understanding of what higher and low values of some of those could be for each one of the genes. For MTHFR, for example, you'd be looking at your homocysteine. For your COMT, you're probably looking at your hormone pathway, especially your estrogens. And we give lab recommendations like the Dutch labs out of Portland. And then glutathione as well, with organic acids. So that are recommended in there. In the StrateGene report itself, we do not give lab findings or lab recommendations for various reasons. But in the book, we do give it to you. It's right there.
Well, thanks, everyone. It's been an honor to have you on board. We've had a ton of people with a ton of questions. If you did not get your questions answered about StrateGene, support at strategene.me is where you want to go to get your questions answered.
And if you're new to StrateGene, the new StrateGene report, which we are offering for you, is very, very comprehensive. And with the combination of the book, the Dirty Genes course, and these webinars, and the Learning Center, and the group for interacting, and the health professional referrals, you're going to be in solid hands. And StrateGene is a lifelong tool. This is not something that you look at once to see which SNPs you have and what supplements you should take, and you're done. This is a lifelong tool, which you always pull in context with whatever you're struggling with in order to support yourself.
And we look forward to seeing you all on our next educational opportunity.
Thank you all.